The twin moons of Xiphos cast a ghostly glow over the dense, whispering canopy of the Valyrian wilds. Ancient trees, their leaves shimmering with bioluminescence, stood as silent witnesses to the trial unfolding beneath them. Perched upon a thick branch, Princess Vayleth of the Silthari pulled back her silver-stringed bow. The arrow she nocked pulsed with soft green light, an extension of her spirit, infused with the energy of the land. Her golden eyes, sharp as a predator's, locked onto her target. A human, a trespasser, Oren Drake. He stood in the clearing below, scanning his surroundings with the wary gaze of a soldier, his cloak tattered from his long journey through the wilds. His presence here was an insult, a violation of sacred land untouched by outsiders for millennia. Humans did not belong in Silthari territory. Vayleth inhaled deeply, steadying her aim. She had felled beasts 3 times his size. A lone human would be no challenge. She released the arrow. It whistled through the air, slicing toward his heart. Then impossibly, his hand shot up, and he caught it. Gasps echoed from the shadows, where unseen Silthari warriors observed in stunned silence. The impossible had just happened. No one, not even the greatest of their warriors, had ever caught a Silthari arrow mid-flight. Vayleth's heart stopped. Then it thundered in her chest. Her fingers trembled as the realization crashed into her like a tidal wave. The sacred law. The binding law. If a warrior's arrow is caught before it finds its mark, the one who holds it is deemed her fated mate. The weight of thousands of years of tradition fell upon her like chains forged in fire. This cannot be. This cannot be. From below, Oren turned the arrow between his fingers, inspecting it with an unreadable expression. Then, his sharp green eyes lifted to meet hers. Amusement flickered in them. Amusement. And then, in a voice both deep and laced with mischief, he smirked. So, when's the wedding? A cold dread settled in Vayleth's stomach. The arrow had been loosed with the intent to kill, but now by sacred law she was bound to him. Vayleth's grip on her bow tightened as Oren twirled the arrow between his fingers, his smirk deepening. His confidence infuriated her. Did he not understand what he had just done? A Silthari warrior's arrow was not just a weapon. It was an extension of her spirit, a sacred bond between hunter and prey, and he had caught it. The warriors hidden in the trees murmured among themselves, their glowing eyes flickering in the darkness. None dared to intervene. This was ancient law, unbreakable law, but Vayleth would not accept it. With a sharp movement, she leapt from the branch, landing with the grace of a predator just a few feet from Oren. The soft earth barely made a sound beneath her boots. She was faster than him, stronger, deadlier, yet he stood there, completely at ease. His clothes were torn from the wild, his muscles tense but unafraid, a warrior's stance, a soldier's confidence. He was no ordinary human. She raised her chin, golden eyes blazing. You do not understand the gravity of what you've done. He lifted a brow, still holding the arrow. Enlighten me. Vayleth's teeth clenched. He was toying with her. By Silthari law, you are now my fated mate, she spat. A bond sealed by the spirits. You are bound to me, and I to you, until death. Oren's smirk faded slightly, a flicker of something else crossing his expression. But then he chuckled, shaking his head. That's quite the tradition. And what if I say no? A sharp, humorless laugh left Vayleth's lips. You think this is a choice? She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. The moment. You caught that arrow. The spirits marked you. If you try to leave, if you try to break the bond, the forest itself will turn against you. The wind howled through the trees as if answering her. Glowing vines shifted in the undergrowth. Eyes peered from the shadows. The wilds were alive, watching. Orin's expression grew serious as he glanced around, understanding dawning in his eyes. This was real. The warriors above remained silent, waiting for the outcome. No one had ever defied the bond and lived. But Vaylith was not like the others. She would find a way. She leaned in, her breath warm against his ear. I will not be chained to a human. I would rather see this bond severed, one way or another. Orin exhaled slowly, then, to her absolute shock, grinned. All right, he said smoothly, twirling the arrow once more before tucking it into his belt. Then let's figure out how to break it. Vaylith's stomach dropped, because no one had ever broken the sacred bond, and she had a sinking feeling that this man was stubborn enough to try. The sacred grove was silent, save for the crackling of the ceremonial flame in the center. The air hummed with unseen power, thick with the presence of the elders of the Silthari. Ethereal figures with glowing silver eyes, their robes woven from the very essence of the forest. Vaylith stood rigid, her jaw clenched, hands fisted at her sides. She hated this. Orin stood beside her, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. He had no right to look so calm, so relaxed. The eldest of the Silthari, High Priestess Liara, studied them with an unsettling gaze before finally speaking. The bond is sealed. There is no breaking it. Vaylith's breath hitched. There must be a way. Her voice was sharp, desperate. Something, anything, a trial, a sacrifice. I will give my very blood to undo this mistake. The elders murmured amongst themselves. Liara's silver eyes flickered toward Orin. And what of you, human? Do you reject this bond as well? For the first time, Orin hesitated. Vaylith turned sharply toward him, expecting a quick confirmation. But he only exhaled, tilting, his head slightly as if considering. It's not that I want to be trapped in a fate I didn't choose, he said slowly. But I also don't believe in running from things just because they're inconvenient. Vaylith's chest tightened. Was he actually considering this? She took a step closer, her voice dropping into a furious whisper. You are supposed to be helping me fight this human. I am, he murmured back, voice annoyingly steady. But what if we're fighting the wrong thing? Before she could snap at him, Liara raised a hand. The murmuring elders fell silent. There is only one way to sever a fated bond, she declared, and Vaylith's heart leapt with hope. But then, one of you must willingly die by the other's hand. The words stung like a blade through her ribs. The fire crackled louder in the silence that followed. Vaylith's mind raced, her pulse roaring in her ears. Was this truly the only way? She was a warrior. She had slain beasts, enemies, trespassers without hesitation. And yet, she looked at Orin, at the man who should have been her enemy, but now stood as something else, something dangerous. Not because of his strength, not because he had caught her arrow, but because, for the first time in her life, she hesitated. She wasn't sure she could do it, and the look in his eyes told her that he wasn't sure he could either. Liara's voice cut through the thick tension. You have 3 days to decide. If the bond remains unbroken, you must honor it for life. The elders faded into the mist, leaving only the fire burning between them. Orin let out a slow breath. So, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. Guess we have a few days to figure out if we want to kill each other or not. Vaylith said nothing, because for the first time, she wasn't sure what she wanted anymore. Vaylith had trained her entire life to be decisive. A Silthari warrior did not hesitate, did not waver, did not let emotions cloud her judgment. Yet here she was, standing in the moonlit grove, fingers hovering over the dagger strapped to her, thigh unable to move. 3 days. 3 days to decide whether to drive a blade into Orin's chest or surrender to a fate she never wanted. She glanced at him across the clearing, where he stood by the river's edge, skipping stones across the water as if he weren't hours away from possibly dying. The cool glow of the twin moons bathed his face, highlighting the sharp angles of his jaw, the small furrow between his brows. He was deep in thought. He should be worried. He should be panicking. Instead, he looked almost peaceful. It irritated her to no end. With a scowl, she approached. "You're too calm for a man on the brink of death." Orin tossed another stone. It bounced twice before sinking. "If you were really going to kill me, you would have done it already." Her fingers twitched over her dagger. "Don't assume I won't." He turned to her then, eyes dark and unreadable. "You don't want to." Something inside her snapped. "You don't know what I want." The words came out sharp, but instead of flinching, Orin stepped closer, too close. "Then tell me." She opened her mouth, then closed it. What did she want? To be free? Yes. To return to her life before him? She should. Then why did the thought of losing him make her chest feel tight? She exhaled sharply, shaking her head. "This isn't about what I want. It's about the bond. The law." Orin studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Then let's break it." She blinked. "You're suggesting we do what exactly?" "Defy the gods?" His lips curled into a smirk. "Why not?" Valith stared at him. He said it so casually, as if challenging the will of the spirits was no different than disobeying a captain's orders. "You are an arrogant fool, and you're terrified." Her breath caught. Before she could refute it, Orin reached for her hand. It was a bold, reckless move, one no Silthari warrior would ever allow. Yet she let him. His touch was warm, steady. "What if the law is wrong?" he murmured. "What if this bond isn't a curse, but a choice?" Valith's pulse roared in her ears. She could still kill him, still sever the bond the way the elders demanded, or she could choose to keep him. The thought terrified her more than anything. She looked into his eyes and saw no fear, only trust, only possibility. And for the first time in her life, she wanted to choose something for herself. Valith's heart thundered in her chest as she stared at Orin's hand clasping hers. His warmth seeped into her skin, unsettling in its comfort. This wasn't supposed to happen. She was supposed to kill him, sever the bond, prove to the gods that she was still in control. And yet, she hadn't let go. The river murmured beside them, its silver surface rippling under the glow of the twin moons. The wind carried the whisper of spirits, voices of the ancestors who had long upheld the sacred law. A law Valith was dangerously close to breaking. "What happens if we refuse?" she whispered, her grip tightening around Orin's. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I'd rather face the unknown than a future I didn't choose." Valith let out a slow breath. The Silthari way had always been clear. Follow the law, obey the elders, respect the will of the gods. There was no room for doubt. But Orin was doubt personified. He made her question everything she had ever known, and perhaps that was why she couldn't bring herself to hate him. Orin stepped closer, his voice low. "If we break the bond, we lose each other forever. But if we keep it..." He hesitated, searching her eyes. "Then maybe we find out what this was meant to be." Valith's throat went dry. Could she do this? Could she defy everything? She thought of her clan, her people, the weight of tradition pressing down on her shoulders. But when she looked at Orin, all she saw was freedom. A different path. A different fate. The flames of the ceremonial fire still burned in the distance, waiting. The elders would expect an answer by dawn. The blade at her waist was heavy, a reminder of the choice she was supposed to make. Kill him. Break the bond. Return to the life she knew, or... She lifted her eyes to Orin, who watched her not with expectation, but with trust. And in that moment, she realized something. The choice was never really about the bond. It was about her. For the first time in her life, Valeth was going to choose for herself. She inhaled sharply, then turned away from the fire, from the laws, from the destiny that had been written for her. "Come with me," she whispered. Oren's lips quirked into a slow, knowing smile. Thought. You'd never ask. They ran, together, into the dark, into the unknown, toward a future that belonged to them alone. The wind howled as Valeth and Oren ran, their boots pounding against the soft forest floor. The ceremonial fire shrank in the distance, swallowed by the darkness of the ancient woods. The twin moons above cast an eerie glow, illuminating their reckless escape she had chosen. For the first time in her life, Valeth had defied the gods, the elders, her people, everything she had been taught to believe. And now, she had only one thought in her mind. Don't stop. Don't look back. But the gods had no intention of letting them go so easily. The air around them crackled, thick with unseen power. The earth trembled beneath their feet. The trees groaned, their ancient roots twisting and shifting as if alive. Then came the voice. Valeth. A whisper, yet it carried through the air like a roar. It wasn't Oren's. It wasn't hers. It was the gods. She skidded to a stop. Oren nearly crashed into her. "What are you doing?" he shouted. "They've found us!" The air shimmered before them, and from the darkness emerged a towering figure. Ethereal, faceless, robed in shifting shadows, a spirit of the Silthari ancestors. "You have broken the sacred law," the voice boomed, reverberating through Valeth's very bones. The bond was not yours to defy. Oren moved in front of her instinctively, as if to shield her. She made her choice. The spirit's form twisted, its presence suffocating. A choice not given is a choice stolen. She belongs to the clan. Valeth's hand found Oren's. "No, I belong to myself." A deep rumble shook the ground. "Then you will suffer the fate of those who deny the gods." A blinding light exploded from the spirit's core. Oren yanked Valeth aside as a force like a storm crashed into the ground where they had stood. The trees snapped, the earth split apart. The gods were angry. Valeth reached for the dagger at her waist, but what use was a blade against the will of the divine? Oren turned to her, urgency in his eyes. "We can't fight them, but we don't have to." Valeth clenched her teeth. "Then what do you suggest, bowing?" Oren smirked despite the chaos. "No, challenging." He turned toward the spirit. "If you claim the bond is sacred, then honor it. We choose each other. Not because of law, but because we want to." The ground went still. The air held its breath. The spirit loomed over them, its form flickering. "A bond made in defiance is no bond at all." Valeth's pulse pounded. "Then let us prove you wrong." Silence. Then for the first time the spirit laughed. A deep, unsettling sound. "Very well." A gust of wind surged through them, and suddenly the heavy pull of the bond around Valeth's soul changed. It was no longer a shackle. It was something else, something new. The spirit's form began to fade. "We will be watching, Valeth of the Silthari, and if your choice was wrong, the gods will return." Then the presence was gone. The forest was still. The fire was gone. The sky was endless. Valeth turned to Oren, her chest heaving. "That was insane," he grinned. And yet, it worked. She exhaled sharply, shaking her head. "So, what now?" Oren took her hand again, his grip firm, steady. "Now, we build our own future." For the first time in her life, Valeth wasn't bound by fate, and that was the most terrifying, exhilarating thing of all. Do you believe in love that defies destiny? Would you challenge fate itself for the one you love? Share your thoughts and let me know if you want more stories like this.